rolling. Okay, well, thanks for taking time out of your afternoon to meet with myself and our fellow Toro coaches. If anyone wanted to come but they miss it, this will be recorded into the Zoom cloud, and I can share it with whoever. I won't introduce myself because you guys all know me, but maybe someone listening somewhere else won't. So my name is Jason. I'm the founder and head coach at Toro Performance. And like I said, I'm joined by Coach Whitley Atkins, who's a PhD candidate, sports scientist, and Toro coach. Pablo Gomez, professional triathlete and Toro endurance coach. And of course, Scott Ellis. He's been a physical therapist for over 10 years, working with endurance athletes. Too many Ironman finishes to count. And also, of course, a Toro Performance coach. So the point of this webinar was really, well, I know many of you are still racing, but I thought it would be a good opportunity to kind of share our views on how to execute the perfect off season, so you have a blueprint prior to your last race. But yeah, we'll get into it. I just want you to pause for a minute and kind of reflect on this season or perhaps last season. I know how dedicated everyone listening is, but really ask yourself, how was your season? Did you progress? Did you get hurt? Did you get mentally burnt out? And no matter what your answer is, I found as a coach and anecdotally, and maybe you have as well, that the most significant predictor of performance breakthroughs starts in the off season. So, you do too little, you do too much, you take a step back from the sport for too long, it can all affect what happens 8 months from now. So if your goal race is, 10 months from now, it sounds silly to say or hyperbolic, but what you do in the next 4 weeks can really affect, 8 months from now. So we'll get right into it. So let's say you just completed Ironman Indiana. Was it yesterday? I think it was Saturday. They were both Saturday. Yeah. The first thing you're going to do is just take a break. Just shut it down. That break could be anywhere up to 4 weeks. This year in particular was loaded with races. I know our athletes were racing perhaps way more than they normally would, just because 2020 was 2020. So, your break may need to be longer, almost more for your mental health than physical rejuvenation. So we're going to take that break 3 to 4 weeks. This is the time where you're going to do something other than swim, bike, or run. It's not the time to turn into a turd. We still want to move, but for 2 weeks, just, no structure, no swim, bike, run. If you want to swim, bike, or run, that's fine. Just don't do it with any structure. So for those who live in the Southwest, or where this is prime time to ride, it can be really tough, because this is when folks in California or Arizona or even the Southern Hemisphere want to really just let it rip. So be patient. You can still go out and enjoy, but for that 3 to 4 weeks or 5 or 6, it's okay to just turn your multi-sport type A quantitative brain off. I like to have athletes during this time of year just go out for a ride and just use a stopwatch. You don't need it. I don't care, just keep it easy. And so step 2 after you take a break is kind of re-injecting that consistency. And like I said, you don't want to be off for too long, but it is important to pause. So the goal of this consistency building phase is just to prepare your body for what's to come, 7-8 weeks from now, which we're going to call the preparatory phase. So this step 2, I guess you could consider the build phase if we're looking at a traditional periodization model. And this is the opportunity to really, start to train again, but with reduced volume, limited intensity, and just to develop, healthy habits. With your training load low and you have time to spare, you can take a break from the sports nutrition, go out with a banana, not 6 gels. This is the opportunity to catch up on sleep, work with a dietitian to improve your body comp, and just take the stress levels down. You don't have to be smoked from training 15 to 20, 25 hours a week. This is, where you can exercise like a normal human being. It's also an opportunity to focus on your technical work. So because we have more time, when we're training in peak season, whatever that is for you, if it's 7 hours, 8 hours, 12 hours, 15 hours, there's not a lot of opportunity to work on our technical work. So this is the time to focus on, of course, swimming. Everybody thinks of swimming when they think of technical work, but that also comes to your bike position. Your bike position is always evolving. As you get fitter, as you mature, as you age, your position's going to change. So when you're on the trainer over the winter, if the weather's cool or you have snow on the ground, put that mirror in front of your trainer, or laterally, or better yet, look at old race photos. Sometimes you're shocked. You're like, oh my God, my head is that high, or I look that awful on the bike. You never know until you see it. So this is the opportunity to get with your bike shop or a bike fitter. If you need to travel to do it, not uncommon. Get your bike and your equipment optimized, swim analysis, run shoes. If you want to try a new run shoe, I feel like every company has a carbon shoe. This is the time to experiment. The stuff that myself or the other coaches would bitch about, for you to experiment during the season. So this is the time. Next step is just to put an emphasis on preparation. We're not building fitness during this 8 to 12 week of off season. We're just preparing the body for the load that's to come. So that doesn't mean we always go easy. Off season, we're still injecting bouts of speed, 30 seconds to a minute on the run. But most of the intensity is going to be on the bike and in the water, because we can still raise your VO2 ceiling on the bike and in the water. And if we do it right, you should be able to access that fitness on the run as we kind of ramp things up. And the last phase that I'll cover is really building your strength, mobility, and athleticism. So the off season is a really good time to get in the gym. During season, the gym can be neglected because we do a lot of sport specific strength, paddles in the pool, hills on the run, big gears on the bike. But this is the time to really dedicate yourself to mobility, and work with a professional, work with a physical therapist. And with that segue, I'm going to pass the torch to Coach Scott Ellis, who will discuss injury prevention and movement dysfunctions. Before that, I should interrupt. Since we have a fairly intimate group, I think we have 12 people. We can pause for questions now, and maybe we could do that after each coach speaks, if there are any. Be sure to unmute yourself. Perfect. Okay. All right, Scott, it's all yours.
All right. So, hello, everybody. As Jason said, for those of you guys that don't know who I am, so Scott Ellis, been coaching with Toro for a couple years now. But as a physical therapist, one of the things I wanted to chat with you guys about is kind of the big thing that I like to make sure my athletes are doing in their off season is a lot of injury prevention, injury treatment. There's a lot of us, by the time we get through, whether our season is one race or like Jason kind of talked about this year, everybody trying to shoehorn in as many races in 2021 as they can. We see by the end of the season, we're kind of coming in on fumes. You've been nursing a IT band issue, plantar fasciitis, low back pain, shoulder pain from your swim, whatever it is. And you kind of just, limp through, you limp through the back half of your season, and, with ibuprofen and everything else. And this is your perfect time now to work on all those imbalances, work on all those things that were affecting your ability, affecting your performance, and putting you in pain. So one of the big things that I always like to tell all my athletes day one when they start working with me is your day one of being, whatever you want to call it, in season training, coming out of your off season, day one of taking on any kind of a training plan is your second most important day of your entire race period to be injury free. First, obviously, being race day, you want to be injury free, but you want day one of your training to be injury free, feeling good. So when you start putting load on, you're putting it on with a good foundation. And we see a lot of times athletes that either like to race year round and never really take that off season, or they have a muscle imbalance, they have a weakness, they have a tendonitis, anything like that. And for a lot of athletes, like right now, they're coming in getting ready to peak for Ironman Arizona, Ironman 70 Arizona, and we get through and we kind of limp through and we say, sweet, I finished that. I have another race in the summertime. I'm going to take that 6 weeks off, and I'm not really going to address it. And they think, all right, I'm going to hit it again in January 1st. The problem is we're going to jump right back in with those same pains. So this is your best time to utilize all of those muscle imbalances, utilizing any aches, pains, and getting those things fixed from the get-go. Big things you can do. Jump in, go see physical therapists, an athletic trainer, chiropractor, whatever it may be, and have them work on some of these movement screens. Figure out where you have any movement imbalances. You're too flexible in one spot, not flexible in enough. But that's the best time that you want to start jumping in. Address it in the off season. That way, when you start day one and you kind of start getting into your load and you start getting into your sport specific movements, your body is fine tuned and ready to go. And kind of as Jason alluded to, as you work on some of your flexibility, you work on some of your muscle imbalances, what we start seeing is now all of a sudden, if you have better back mobility, better hamstring flexibility, that's all of a sudden you're going to see yourself, you can tolerate getting a better bike fit now, because you can fit into these positions a little bit better. So you may tolerate a more aggressive, more aerodynamic bike fit. And those are the times that we can start kind of getting you into those positions, because, those are the type of things that flexibility is just free speed on the bike. So those are some of those things that I like to make sure that my athletes really utilize their downtime for. Another big one, another kind of big emphasis on that is for a lot of us as coaches. I know when we start getting our athletes that are building into kind of peak volume approaching their A race, that's usually when we start seeing a decrease in what we call the ancillary care. So your core work, your flexibility type work, some of your cross training, your strength training. And as that starts to drop down, as your race specific volume starts to increase, off season is your time to start building back in. And as your race specific training volume is just plummeting, getting down to 3, 4, 5 hours a week, this is your time to start going, hey, I need to start entering in stretching, yoga, core strength. Like Jason said, getting back into the gym and doing strength training. This is the best time to do it, because it's new loads, new kind of differed movement patterns for your body. So that's how we're going to start combating tendonitis, muscle imbalances, things like that. Kind of the last thing I wanted to kind of hammer on this is, so I'm taking a look at my notes, make sure I didn't lose anything here. Is the whole idea of using your off season to cross train. Kind of piggybacking off what Jason was saying, this is the best time of year that is hard for athletes to say, I don't want to ride. What do you mean I can't go out and do my riding? I'm finally hitting 70 degree weather. This is the best time. This is the time I like to tell my athletes, if you want to go ride, great, but maybe change what you're doing. If you're always hammering out on the roads, try mountain biking. Not anything, not with any kind of specific metrics that you're having to go out, but go out and hit the trails. You like running, maybe we go out and do some hiking. Maybe we got to do some paddle boarding, where you're still really hammering out that aerobic capacity, but we're getting new movement patterns. We're getting different strains and stresses on the body, so that we start kind of getting that body to really take new loads without having to overwork with the same repetitive movement patterns. And more importantly, what that does is it also gives your brain kind of a break of just getting on the hamster wheel and just plowing through hour after hour on your Wahoo, where you're just sick of kind of seeing the same, staring at your aero bars over and over again. This just gives you a little bit of a different change from your body, different body mechanics, but it also gives you a little bit more mental break, which helps combat burnout, helps combat a lot of that wear and tear. And that I'm so sick of getting, staring at the pool and getting that blue lane over and over and over again, where you can still get your aerobic capacity without having to worry about that overuse and that burnout. And it helps you kind of come in day one of being in season, a little more energetic, a little more fresh. You have that fire a little bit bigger than you would have had you continued with the same movements and the same type of training over and over again. But that's kind of the big points that I wanted to hammer in here. Obviously, when in doubt, any type of aches and pains, or even if you don't have pain, but you just feel that you're tight, you're immobile, you started to have some imbalances, your right leg feels more, feels looser than your left leg. Or for a lot of our swimmers, if you are a unilateral breather, you'll realize that you have better neck mobility or shoulder or trunk mobility on your breathing side. Go, fit into any of your healthcare professionals. This is your time to hit your sports medicine team to really address any of those imbalances and make sure that you're coming in day one as healthy and mobile and as stable as can be. But I think that's all I got for you, Jason.
Great. Anyone have any specific questions for Scott? And we'll do a kind of a roundup at the end if people are jumping on late or missed one of the other topics. But yeah, if you have any questions, unmute yourself and we can address it. Otherwise, we will transition to Coach Whitley. And again, Whitley is a sports scientist and PhD candidate and smarter than everyone else who represents Toro on this call.
Hi, everyone. So I agree, obviously, with everything Jason and Scott have said about, getting ready for the season from a physical standpoint. But I also want us to think about using this time to kind of realign priorities that we may have put on the back burner. The thing that makes us strong, good athletes is that we're pretty driven, a lot of A-type personalities. And usually this is in multi-facets of our life. However, it's very hard to be great at everything that we have on our plate. And a lot of times when we're training 20 hours a week, some other things that kind of push to the back. And I think that to have longevity in the sport and like Scott said, to prevent burnout. And we know as athletes that our biggest key to being successful is adherence and consistency in the sport. So we do want to avoid burnout. And I think in doing that is we want to focus on other aspects of our life we may have neglected. So going from 20 hours a week, maybe you're training 10 hours a week in the off season, that opens up a lot of time that we have to spend on some other things. I think that it's important to kind of realign some of the priorities. Like I said, just shift them a little bit. So use this time to focus a little bit more on something career-based that you may have let slide, or spend some time to be with your family, go on a date with a significant other. And this doesn't have to be completely inactive. You can definitely spend more time hiking with friends, family, make it active. If that's something that you need and you want for your off season, that's totally fine. But think about ways and be creative on how you can spend that time with others. Aside, I think that this is another really important time to catch up on appointments that you may need. So blood work is really important. I think that being able to have insight into kind of what's going on under the hood, now is the time to do it. So talk to your PCP, primary care physician, find a way to get that blood work done. We may have our nutrition dialed in during training, and most of us are probably pretty good outside of training itself, but there are always things that can be missed and can kind of creep up on us. So if you feel like there's any reason you need to get checked out, I definitely encourage that to be done during this time so that you can address it before the season starts.
Perfect. Willie, can you add any insight into some of the upside of kind of experimenting with nutrition during the off season, and maybe some tips as far as, the low end of what people can tolerate and getting into the downside of fat adaptation, or maybe the benefits of fat adaptation without opening a can of worms. And I like to have athletes during this time of year experiment with, real or whole foods during training, just to, shock the body and not get kind of stuck to absorbing, sucrose and fructose. It's such a high octane potion. So maybe you could just delve into that for a couple minutes.
Yeah, definitely. So I think that using sports supplements, gels, whatever your hydration sports drink of choices is great when training is at its all-time volume. But I'm with Jason. I think that whole foods and training, especially on the bike, we can tolerate things with practice much better on the bike than you can running, for instance. But if you're going to go on a long ride and there's no goals of power goals, things like that, like take granola bars, take bananas, take things that still are pretty high in carbohydrates, but they're going to fill you up a little bit more. As far as the off season, like outside of training, yeah, use this time to eat a lot more fiber than you would. Like some people can't handle a lot of fiber the night before you go run. Perfect. But when you don't have quite the same goals in training, experiment with what your top end of fiber may be. Like a lot of goals are 20 to 25 grams of fiber per 2,000 calories. I'm just saying experiment. You don't want to upset stomachs during training, but you do want to experiment with some of those things when you don't have a goal for running the next day. I'm not, and this is not to open a can of worms, but I'm not a huge fan of the fat adaptation. We burn carbs and they're used as a primary source of fuel, even for long distance athletes like Ironman distance. However, if you feel like you're just operating on high carbs all the time, think about moving more to protein and fat intake at the end of your training, like for dinner and things like that. Pay attention to how you feel, make notes. Y'all, writing down things is so important about how you feel so you can look back. Humans have terrible recall bias when we're like trying to remember what we did the week before. Write down, have a training log. I think this is a great time to develop that habit, especially when it comes to diet and supplementation. Find out what makes you feel good and write it down. If you had a great ride, write down what you had the day before, the night before, and implement it again. See if you have that same response. Yeah, I think it's a really good time to experiment nutrition. And Jason touched on this too, but if you're trying to change any body composition goals at all, whether that's gain muscle, lose fat, now is also the time to do it. Get with a dietitian who can really coach you through that process as well. When we start messing with weight during season, performance is going to be the first thing to go.
Perfect. Yeah. And I think, any type of GI issues that you've battled during the season, it's a really good opportunity to kind of address and experiment, like Whitley said, with blood work. You could probably just go to LabCorp and get a basic food panel and just kind of reverse engineer. Okay, is it a morning session that I always have to stop to use the bathroom on the run? Is it an afternoon? Like, what am I eating that could be potentially causing issues? But yeah.
One more quick thing to input. As the seasons change, hydration needs are going to change as well. As it gets cooler, you won't need as much on your long rides and runs, but it is important to evaluate that and know that. For those of you who don't know your sweat rate, super important to know, especially y'all out in Arizona. Easy way to do it is hop on a scale before you go out on your run or your ride, and then weigh yourself after. Make sure that you're taking into account what you ate and drank in the meantime. Whatever you sweat out in kilograms is going to be your sweat rate. And that's how much you need to be either drinking while you're working out or recovering post. It's very hard for us to drink a liter running for an hour, sure, but just make sure that you're getting that back in afterwards. And if anyone has any questions about calculating sweat rate, I can definitely help with that.
Yeah, and I think Whitley, you wrote a blog on the Toro website about training and racing in the heat. And I think we hyperlinked to our sweat test protocol, which is exactly what Whitley described. So yeah, always good to do that, especially in the desert where you don't realize you're even sweating. And, people can brag to me on Training Peaks. Oh, I got through a 3-hour ride with one bottle. It's February. I'm like, yeah, it's great, but you certainly compromised tomorrow's training. But yeah, that's neither here nor there. That's an entirely new podcast or webinar, maybe next time. Any specific questions for Whitley before we move on to the Graham Poobah? Perfect. Without further ado, Coach Pablo Gomez. Pablo, I've had the pleasure of coaching, as I coach Scott and Whitley as well, but I've had the pleasure of coaching Pablo since he was an age grouper, elite age grouper into the professional ranks. And now he's a flourishing professional athlete. And he's raced a zillion 70.3s and has experimented with every type of training, nutrition, training stimulus, and brings more to the sport from a knowledge standpoint than anyone I know. So looking forward to hearing Pablo speak on this.
Thank you, Jason. Hi, everybody. So I think thank you to all the other coaches for the incredible advice. And I kind of want to just piggyback on all of that and kind of close a little bit the topic. I like to see the off season and break it up in two parts, kind of the off season as it is, and then the preseason. And we hear these two words in ESPN all the time with football and all the different sports. And I think it's very important to mark a difference between the two, because the off season is that time where, you know, it can be 1 to 3 weeks to 4 weeks, depending on who you are as an athlete and where you're coming from. But that's the time to really just kind of either make it light, like Whitley mentioned, and kind of she touched on staying active with family and friends and doing different things, but also just not doing anything. You know, this is the time to take a trip and forget about your bike, forget about the goggles, and kind of just be a regular adult. And I think that's the main goal for the off season, is just be an adult and just be a healthy adult. And that means, you know, having different foods and drinks and just enjoying life like you normally don't do it during the season, because it's too hard to be able to do all those things. Having said that, I think it's important to head into the off season with some goals, with some short-term goals that we're gonna tackle kind of in the preseason, and then some long-term, and that's your next year's main race or couple of races that you're gonna target. But I do think that it's important to head into the off season when you take that break with a goal and with a North Star, because otherwise it's too easy to extend that period of light or non-active work to, I don't know, 5 weeks, a month and a half, and then you're messaging your coach and you're like, hey man, I want to get back, and it's been 6 weeks. And so I think it's important to have something in the calendar just to kind of keep you accountable. And also because I think that right now races are filling out much faster. So it's good that you kind of finalize that race registration for that Ironman or that half Ironman that you have dreamed to do, because they can fill out. And then I think right now it's the time to start looking for those races, finalizing those plans. And you don't have to buy plane tickets, but at least, you know, sign up for that race. That being said, after you take the time off, I think it's the right time to focus on kind of dialing things that you normally don't do in the season. So as Jason mentioned, running shoes, bike feed, testing your sweat rate, you know, all those little things that normally will take time out of training, this is the time to do it. And after you do that, put all that race gear away and head out for specific fun training. And that means hikes, mountain bike rides that are not gonna, you know, injure you, gravel rides. And I think it's just finding all those different things that allow you to be an active person, allow you to keep some things in the schedule, are not gonna put you in danger. If you ask me, downhill skiing, you know, sometimes you gotta think how good of a downhill skier are you? But it's the time to do that kind of stuff. So, and after you do that, you you can start building and adapting your body into the season. And you hear great, you know, famous coaches talk about those first couple of weeks being a great time to let your body adapt for training. And I think this is super important because, as Jason said, you can make enormous gains if you do this right. If you jump into that preseason, being very conscious of the intensity that you're doing, and also just kind of listening to the coach and going really next to the plan to make sure that you are not overdoing it. Because I think that's the biggest mistake that we have all made, and it's just overdoing it in the preseason. And I've walked out of preseasons with, you know, plantar fasciitis and different injuries, and I know plenty of athletes that this has happened to. And I think it's because we get a little bit too carried away. We are feeling fresh. We are feeling, you know, like we maybe need to kind of go into training hard to make sure that we stay there. And that can lead to a couple of issues. So just take these first couple of weeks and kind of build into it with some fun training, but also kind of like watching that intensity, so you can set a good base for the build phase and all the different phases that come afterwards. But I do think that it's important to keep those first couple of weeks back very controlled, very conscious of what you're doing, so we can have success later in the year.
Awesome. Yeah, and I think it's really important during this phase to, as you ease back into it, the last kind of race or training we have in our mind is when we were at our fittest. You know, you were preparing for your A race, and you come down and those first couple runs, you look at your watch and you're like, oh my God, like it's all gone. And you have to just let that go. It's going to come back. You know, you're not going to lose it. Even if you take 8 weeks off, this is your athletic journey is a progression. You need to keep building and coming down and build again. As long as you continue to progress, that's all we're doing in the off season. If you don't take an off season, you'll keep progressing, but eventually you're gonna crash. Off season is you have to make that choice.
And I think that's right now we are also seeing that issue with a lot of people, because this is the first year we are back racing, and I know plenty of people are feeling very excited about, hey, I want to race again. And, maybe they're doing a half Ironman in October, November, even December, and they're going to feel like they want to keep pushing into 2022. But I think that's, hey, this is the time to, if you're racing in October, take, November as that month to go through the off season, preseason, first couple of weeks of the preseason, kind of almost take Christmas and allow Christmas to, push you a little bit into January, and then you can start, that build phase, because otherwise we're going to have a very different conversation come June, even May or April next year.
Totally.
So
any questions on the last point of emphasis? Cool. Well, let me just wrap it up by emphasizing, I guess, the one word to take home would just be progression. Don't chase fitness during this, off season, which is typically, anywhere from 6 to 12 weeks. And that doesn't mean you don't do anything for 6 weeks. That encompasses, 2 weeks of what we call that transition phase of your last race, where you're kind of just chilling out for a week and then easing back into some walking, maybe some light training. And then the next 10 to 12 weeks is just that preparatory phase. So, for a lot of people in 2020, we had prep phases, then we would peak, and then prep phases, because I can't just we can't have athletes just continue to build. So the off season is the time to prepare your body to absorb the load that's coming. Your metrics are naturally not going to be impressive. That's okay. It's not the time to obsess over Strava segments. Who cares? Anyone who is a hero now until race season is likely not going to be a hero on race day. So ignore that. Again, the main elements: taking a smart but short break, ease back into technical movements of all three sports, improve musculoskeletal integrity through getting in the gym, working with your PT, text Scott Ellis at 2 a.m, and then refocus on your positive supporting habits. So catch up on sleep, nutrition. If you need to work on your body comp, if that was an issue during the season, now's the time to get tabs on that by working with a registered dietitian, ideally a sports dietitian, but get with them, and then dialing in your hydration based on sweat rates. So if you can reflect on your season and you progressed across all three disciplines, you stayed injury-free, great. But there's always an area of opportunity. So with that, I thank everyone for jumping on for 45 minutes or so. If you have any questions, you can unmute and ask away. Otherwise, we're always just, you can head to toroperformance.net and hit that message button, or I'm sure you all have our contact information if you need it. But easiest way is toroperformance.net. Anything? Bueller? Perfect. Cool. Well, thank you guys for your time. Scott, Whitley, and Pablo, if you could stay on the line. Were you going to add something, Pablo?
Yeah, no, I think that Whitley pointed out some important stuff, in you too, and Scott did too, in the sense that have conversations right now. Like right now is the time to really talk to all the different professionals, and not only physical health, mental health, and we go dietitian, PT, therapist, if that's something that you like and you have worked with before. Maybe this is the time to start working with a therapist. But I think that the off season really maybe can bring some thoughts into some people where there is doubt and there is kind of maybe fear of what's going on. And so it's the time to have conversations, and I think as coaches we also are here for some of those conversations, but there are also professionals that can help. So just
you do not have the same amount of time to bury all of your emotions in training. So
or in a Training Peaks comment.
Yeah, or on a weekly call if that's what you do.
Make sure that Training Peaks comment is about 9 paragraphs long for Jason every time.
I just reply with a thumbs up. Well, cool. Well, thank you guys so much for coming. And yeah, we will do this again, and we will talk to you